Hello, and thank you for tuning in for a training by the Audubon Society of Rhode Island's Avian Research Initiative on our window strike survey work that we do here in the state of Rhode Island. I appreciate your willingness to contribute your time and energy to this and all of the other extremely important data collection projects that we have ongoing at the Society. My name is Charles Clarkson. I am the Director of Avian Research at Audubon, and I'm going to be taking the next 15 to 20 minutes just to give you a rundown of the issue, the background behind bird building collisions, and why it is such a large driver of decline for our North American and global bird populations, and how we can address this source of decline through data collected by our volunteers and small steps taken in residential communities. So if you haven't heard, bird populations aren't doing well, and they have not been doing well for quite some time. A fairly influential paper was released in 2019 that was conducted, it was research conducted by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology in concert with a number of other research organizations that looked at long-term data of bird populations and found that roughly since 1970, over a 50-year window, we lost approximately 2.9 billion individual birds from the North American landscape, which translates to roughly 30% of the total. This is particularly startling considering the fact that birds have been on this planet evolving for over 150 million years. And while they've experienced fluctuations in population, to lose 30% of an entire population in such a very short period is very serious cause for conservation concern. The paper went on to subdivide all of the birds by taxonomic guild, by foraging guild, and actually looked at the difference between those birds that were considered residents, meaning they tend to stay in one location throughout the year, and those that are migratory. And of these two groups, the migratory birds, the ones that rely on multiple habitat types, the breeding habitat, the overwintering habitat, as well as multiple stopover locations for refueling en route to these winter and breeding destinations, these birds were hit particularly hard. So out of the 2.9 billion birds lost, 2.5 billion of them exhibited some form of migration, whether that was short distance, taking them over just 100 miles or a few hundred miles along their migratory routes, through to the high distance or the long distance migrants, which are covering hundreds or even thousands of miles during migration. And these birds lost a great deal of their population from a number of contributing factors. The primary driver of decline in migratory birds is and has been for quite some time habitat loss. Simply put, degrading or removing habitat tends to remove the capacity for these birds to stop and refuel to replenish lost resources during their lengthy migrations. But we also know that there are additional drivers of declines that have reduced bird populations through time. And some of this is what we consider in the conservation world to be low-hanging conservation fruit, meaning there's a relatively simple thing to do that we can enact today to help fix these issues. The number one additional driver of decline has been identified for quite some time as cats, but both house cats and feral cats combined kill approximately 2.4 billion individual birds here in the United States alone every single year. And so by doing something as simple as keeping your cats indoors, you can immediately contribute to avian conservation in a relatively huge way. If you'll notice, the very second thing on this list that contributes to bird mortality is building and window collisions. So birds flying into the sides of buildings or flying into windows contributes to 600 million individual birds lost every single year, roughly. And recent research, which was just released last year, documents that we have been severely underestimating the number of birds that die by flying into windows and buildings. So this paper looked at not just the reported deaths from volunteers finding birds at the base of buildings after they had struck those buildings and died. But they also looked at the number of injured birds that were being taken to rehab centers. And considering the fact that about 60% of those birds that are taken to rehab centers subsequently die from their injuries, this research paper found that we are severely underestimating the total numbers of birds that die by flying into buildings and windows. And the true metric is something exceeding 1 billion birds here in the United States every single year. So that pretty much doubles the total number of birds that are dying in the US alone every single year from flying into windows. As a very brief primer as to why this happens, if we're talking specifically about birds and glass, over the course of their 160 million a year evolutionary history, birds did not co-evolve alongside glass, so they don't understand what this clear pane of glass is, and they perceive it to be something they can simply fly through. They don't perceive it to be different from air itself. Compound on that the fact that in residential areas, oftentimes people like to put their house plants next to their windows so that those plants can collect sunlight and photosynthesize and remain healthy. By doing this, a bird obviously sitting on the outside of your home cannot really tell that there is glass separating them from these plants, and think that it's perfectly feasible for them to fly over and land on those plants and either use them to perch or to forage. And in so doing, they strike the glass itself. So birds cannot perceive glass. They think they can fly through it, and oftentimes we make it very, very easy for them to perceive a tunnel of light or vegetation that they can fly to by passing through this pane of glass. So if you think about the number of times you hear a bird hit your window, you may hear a bird strike your window maybe once, maybe twice over the course of an entire year. And you might think to yourself, well, that's only 2 bird deaths a year. That's not a huge source of mortality. And while you're correct that your house alone might not contribute much to the overall mortality of birds in North America, if we multiply the number of birds that are striking your house by the fact that there are roughly 145 million homes that dot the United States, that very quickly adds up to a very substantial mortality. If we're talking more specifically about urban habitats and how they tend to have large numbers of avian deaths as a result of window and building collisions, you have to take into account that a lot of these mortality events occur over the course of migration, and the vast majority of birds migrate at night. So nocturnal migrating birds that are flying during the overnight hours en route to either southerly overwintering grounds or northerly breeding grounds here in the Northern Hemisphere. And this is something they've done for millions of years. And for many of these birds, they're using a stellar compass to guide their migration. So they're using the stars above them to guide their route. And for a bird that's flying 2,000 to 10,000 feet off the surface of the ground, you can see that the landscape below them, as you can see here looking at the US, is very brightly lit, and it can actually be quite confusing, particularly for immature birds that might be undergoing their first annual migration. These are birds that are flying overhead, trying to use the stars above them to navigate. However, it looks as though there are constellations below them as well. And oftentimes, these bright lights that are scattered across the landscape below them can draw these birds off route, where they become disoriented, they become basically starved for energy, and they end up flying exhausted into urban city centers where they strike buildings and windows. So here's just an example of how bad things can be. This is the 9/11 Memorial in New York City, and you can see these 2 shafts of light shooting up into night at night, and all of these small specks that are in these 2 columns of light are actually birds that are being drawn off course during migration. And in one single night on September 14th, 2021, nearly 400 birds were drawn off route, entrained in these bright columns of lights, became disoriented, confused, and exhausted, and they ended up striking buildings and windows in the city of New York and died as a result. It's not only something that happens here on the East Coast. In Texas, a single building claimed nearly 400 migratory birds in one night due to the same phenomenon. Brightly lit buildings, pulling birds off of their migratory routes, disorienting them, exhausting them, and resulting in a large-scale mortality event. So if we look at these two sources of mortality, roughly 56% of all bird window strikes occur in urban areas during these periods of migration, oftentimes during overnight hours. And the remaining 44% of all of these mortality events occur in residential areas such as your own home, your neighborhood, or your place of work. If we're talking specifically about residential window strikes, there's actually something that you can do today to greatly reduce the number of birds that are striking your windows. You can apply UV decals, which are very readily available at your Wild Birds Unlimited stores, online at retailers such as Amazon. You place the order for these, they show up to your house a few days later. They are, for all intents and purposes, clear decals that you do not see very well when you put them on your window, making sure to put them on the outside of the window. However, birds see into the ultraviolet spectrum, so they can actively see these decals, and they make that window visible to them. So therefore, they know they cannot fly through this. The downside of these decals is that they last on average 1 year, so you do need to replace them annually. If you're looking for a more long-term solution, you can buy forms of window strike tape. As you can see here, this dot matrix that's being applied on the right-hand side. These types of tapes can be applied to your windows and left for 10 years or more before they are in need of replacement. So you have the capacity to purchase both of these and apply them to your window, and immediately upon doing so, you will greatly reduce the number of birds that are striking your windows, because suddenly these panes of glass will become visible to them. Now, if we're talking about urban environments, however, it's a little bit more complex. It has a lot to do with making sure that non-essential lights are turned off during these peak periods of migration, and that oftentimes means working with the city itself or individual building owners. So the National Audubon Society has created the Lights Out program specifically to address migration mortality in urban cities. And this is an agreement that cities engage in with the National Audubon, whereby they agree to turn off all non-essential lights or draw blinds so that internal lights from buildings do not emanate out into the night air between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. when the bulk of nocturnal migration is occurring. This occurs during the two peak periods of migration, the first occurring during spring migration, which generally happens between early April and the middle part of June, and then again during fall migration, which occurs from the 15th of August through the 1st of November. This is clearly a win-win situation, because in addition to saving the lives of countless millions of birds that might otherwise be drawn off course, exhausted, and fly into these buildings, the building owners themselves are finding themselves saving energy as a result of turning off these non-essential lights. To date, over 30 cities have signed on to the National Audubon's Lights Out program, including cities like Portland, Denver, Dallas, and here in New England, areas like New York and Boston. So the question we have at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island is, how bad is the problem in Providence? Providence, Rhode Island does not currently sign on to the National Audubon's Lights Out program, and at Audubon Society of Rhode Island, we are interested in determining whether or not they are candidates for this program, and how much of a source of mortality is Providence to the overall mortality that is being experienced at the larger United States or even regional scale. So we at Audubon are collecting data from both of these sources of mortality, both what's occurring in residential areas as well as what's occurring in urban areas, through volunteer collected data, which is very simple to report. And this allows us to better understand our state's contribution to the problem. If over 1 billion birds are dying across the United States, what's the contribution here in Rhode Island? So we have sampling throughout migration periods occurring in downtown Providence, and we have year-round sampling occurring at residential zones. So we'll take these in turn. Residential data collection is extremely easy. Anytime you detect a bird collision at your place of residence, and anytime you detect a bird collision maybe at your place of work, or anytime you detect a bird collision incidentally. So it can be as simple as going to the grocery store and noticing that a bird has flown into the window at your local grocer. You can report those bird window strikes using a very easy form online that we have housed on our website. Our website is ASRI, which stands for Audubon Society, Rhode Island.org. So if you go to our website, asri.org, right on the homepage, you can see a link for Take Action, and down on that link is Report a Bird Strike. By clicking on that button, it will take you to a web page where the problem of window collisions with birds is explained, and you are met with this large red button to report a bird strike. When you click on this button, you will be presented with an online reporting form. It's a very simple reporting form to fill out. I'll actually go over it in just a few slides with you. But once you get to this reporting form, make sure that you bookmark it on your phone so that every time you detect a window collision, you can just go to that bookmark and fill out the form for another event instead of having to navigate back through Audubon's homepage. So this is year-round data collection. And our data are only as good as the number of people who are out collecting and submitting information. So while you might be willing to submit data from your own home and place of work, please help spread the word. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your coworkers that they too can contribute data to this extremely important project. We want to understand the total species diversity that are being impacted by these window collisions. And we also want to get a handle on the total numbers of individual birds that are dying throughout the state of Rhode Island as a result of residential window collisions. So please, in addition to contributing your own data, encourage as many other people to do so as you can. The urban data collection is a little bit more nuanced, but equally as easy. So we are primarily interested in having folks collect data during both the spring and fall migration. The window for data collection for spring migration pretty much falls between the 1st of April to the 1st of June. And in fall, we're looking at data collection occurring from the 15th of August through the 1st of November. The urban data collection is as simple as choosing a walking transect in Providence that you will walk every single morning, shortly after or before sunrise, and up into the point when foot traffic gets too heavy for you to conduct your surveys and be able to actually find the bird. So this is generally, depending upon the time in which you're out collecting data, between 6 and 7:30 a.m. in the morning. And again, you'll be using the exact same Google form to document every one of the window strikes that you encounter during the survey routes. This year, we are pushing very hard to find folks who are willing to go out and survey every single morning. Historically, over the last 2 years, we've had a lot of volunteers contribute data, but oftentimes the data collection is relatively haphazard. It's when folks have the availability to do so. So we have volunteers that might go out 3 or 4 times over the course of the entire migratory period. While any data are appreciated and useful, this might give us an idea of overall species diversity. So to date, we've documented 31 different species that have been impacted by building collisions in downtown Providence. But with such haphazard data collection, this doesn't really give us much of a capacity to determine the total abundances of birds that are impacted. So one of the things that we really want to get a better handle on is understanding how many birds die in Providence, in the city of Providence, every single spring and fall migration from flying into buildings. And in order to truly understand that, we really do need volunteers out collecting data every single morning during both the spring and fall migratory periods. It's a very easy thing to do. Data collection really couldn't get any easier than this. The first step is to choose a walking transect. This is an example of my walking transect. So this is the transect that I try to perform every single morning during the spring and fall migratory periods. I basically walk this route. It takes me about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending upon how many mortality events I find. And every single time I find a bird, The second step in this is to document that bird strike using the online Google form. So the same form you would use to document a window strike at your place of residence, you would use that bookmarked form on your phone and document the bird you would find in downtown Providence. So basically, it's as simple as putting in your email, your name, the date of the detection, what species you detected. If you do not know the species, that's okay, because later you can actually add a file that is a photo that you've taken of that bird, what time you detected the window strike, the building. So if it has a name, you can use the building's name. If it doesn't have a name, you can use the address of the building, how many stories the building is in height, and you can simply count the number of windows to determine that, which building face the bird was detected, north, south, east, or west, the approximate distance of the bird from the building. Was the bird still alive? If it was, did you deliver it to a rehab clinic? And then uploading photos. So this is a very simple thing to do. I highly encourage you to contribute data both for both the residential and the urban aspects of this project. This is important information that we at Audubon use for education, for advocacy, and for our own scientific understanding of what kind of mortality Rhode Island is contributing to the United States total number of roughly 1 billion birds killed every single year from flying into a window. The next step in this project is to email me with the route that you plan to survey. You do not have to have it demarcated on a map the way that I just showed you. You can simply explain to me the route you would like to take, and I will work with you to figure out the best survey for you to run every single day, the best route that keeps you safe, that is easy to do feasibly and logistically from where you are located. I will then send you a link to that Google form so you can bookmark it without having to go through our webpage to do so. And then starting on April 1st, you would simply go out and start collecting data for the upcoming field season during spring migration. And again, the residential reporting is year-round, so you can start doing that today and report window strikes in your community and your place of work. So thank you so much for tuning in. I sincerely hope that you will take some time to contribute data to this extremely important project. And thank you for all that you do and all the support you show for the Audubon Society of Rhode Island.